The mist clung to Ravencrest Keep like a burial shroud, thick and cold as the stone walls that had weathered 5 centuries of Highland wars. Lady Eowyn stood at the eastern tower window, watching the army's remnants trudge through the iron gates below. Their armor was dented, their banners torn and muddied, their faces hollow with the weight of defeat. The autumn rain had turned the courtyard into a mirror of gray sky, reflecting nothing but despair. She had been expecting them for 3 days. Commander Thorne dismounted first, his black warhorse steaming in the frigid air. He was a mountain of a man, broad-shouldered and granite-jawed, with a scar that split his left eyebrow like a lightning strike. Behind him came Captain Aldrich, younger but no less weathered, carrying something wrapped in oilcloth that made Eowyn's heart tighten. Not with grief, but with fury she dared not show. The great hall doors groaned open beneath her. She heard the shuffle of boots, the clatter of weapons being set aside, the murmur of voices that went silent when she appeared at the top of the stone staircase. Every eye turned upward. Every face expected tears. Lady Eowyn descended slowly, her burgundy gown whispering against the steps, her auburn hair pinned back in the severe style befitting a commander's wife. At 28, she had learned to wear authority like armor, to speak with her husband's voice when he rode to war, to govern these lands with an iron will wrapped in silk diplomacy. She had managed harvests and border disputes, negotiated with neighboring lords, and kept the kingdom's northern frontier secure while Alaric led campaigns in the south. She reached the bottom step. Commander Thorne stepped forward, holding the oilcloth bundle like a sacrificial offering. "My lady," his voice was gravel and smoke, "I bear grievous news. Lord Alaric fell 3 nights past at the Battle of Thornridge. He died defending the king's left flank against overwhelming odds. His sacrifice saved 2,000 men." He unwrapped the bundle, revealing a banner, crimson silk emblazoned with the silver wolf of House Ravencrest, now stained dark with what might have been blood or mud or both. This was all we could recover. The enemy took his body. The hall held its breath. Servants pressed hands to mouths. Soldiers bowed their heads. Even the fire in the great hearth seemed to dim, as if the castle itself mourned. Lady Eowyn took the banner in both hands. She studied the stains, the torn edges, the way the silver thread caught the torchlight. Her fingers traced the wolf's snarling face, embroidered by her own hand the week before Alaric had ridden away. Then she smiled. It was not a large smile, just a subtle curve at the corner of her mouth, there and gone like a breath. But in a room full of grief, it landed like a thunderclap. Commander Thorne's eyes widened. Captain Aldrich actually took a step back. A serving girl dropped a copper pitcher, the clang echoing through the sudden, awful silence. "My lady?" Thorne's voice cracked with confusion, and something that might have been fear. "Perhaps the shock—" "There is no shock, Commander." Eowyn's voice was steady as the stones beneath her feet. She folded the banner carefully, almost tenderly, and handed it to a nearby steward. "My husband is a man of considerable skill. If he had truly fallen, I would know it. Not from a banner or a messenger's word, but here." She pressed a hand to her heart. "And here." She touched her temple. 10 years of marriage teaches you things that armies cannot understand." "My lady, I saw him surrounded," Thorne insisted, desperation creeping into his tone. 20 enemy soldiers, maybe more. He ordered us to retreat while he held the line. When we regrouped at dawn, there was only blood and no body," Eowyn finished. "How convenient." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Thorne's face darkened, his jaw clenching. Captain Aldrich's hand drifted toward his sword hilt, a reflexive movement that did not go unnoticed. "You dare question my report?" Thorne's voice dropped to a dangerous rumble. "I have served House Ravencrest for 20 years. I rode beside Lord Alaric through a dozen campaigns. I would die before I dishonored his memory with lies." "Then perhaps you should examine whose lies you have chosen to believe." Eowyn moved past him, her gown trailing through the puddles of rainwater tracked in by muddy boots. She stopped before the great hearth, staring into flames that painted her face in shades of amber and shadow. "Tell me, Commander, who gave the order to engage at Thornridge?" "Lord Alaric planned to hold at Greystone Pass where the terrain favored our forces. Thornridge is open ground. Suicide against superior numbers." Silence. Then Aldrich spoke, his voice careful. "General Corvain countermanded the order. He said the king demanded immediate action." "Did he?" It was not a question. Eowyn turned, and now her smile was gone. replaced by something harder, colder. And where is General Corvain now? Riding to the capital, Thorn admitted, to inform the king personally and to petition for control of the northern territories. Someone must govern in Lord Alaric's absence. Absence, Elowen repeated softly. An interesting choice of words. Not death. Absence. She walked toward them again, each step deliberate. General Corvain has coveted these lands since my father refused him my hand 12 years ago. He has whispered poison in the king's ear about Alaric's loyalty, questioned our family's commitment to the crown, suggested we grow too powerful. And now, conveniently, my husband falls in a battle Corvain orchestrated, at a location Corvain chose, leaving no body to prove anything. You suggest treason? Thorn's hand went to his sword. Around them, soldiers tensed. The air crackled with potential violence. I suggest, Elowen said quietly, that you are honest men caught in a dishonest game. I do not blame you, Commander. You followed orders. You fought bravely. You returned to tell me what you were meant to tell me. But I will not play the grieving widow for men who would steal my husband's legacy while his body is still warm, or perhaps while his heart still beats in a cell somewhere south of here. Thorn and Aldrich exchanged glances. Something passed between them. Doubt, perhaps, or fear. Aldrich cleared his throat. There were rumors, he said slowly. Some of the men claimed they heard shouting after we retreated. Not battle cries, but orders. Coordinated. Like a capture, not a slaughter. Aldrich, Thorn warned. She deserves to know. Aldrich stepped forward, his young face earnest beneath the grime of travel. My lady, if Lord Alaric lives, he's either in General Corvain's custody or he's exactly where he needs to be, Elowen interrupted, waiting for the right moment, watching his enemies reveal themselves. My husband is many things, Captain, but predictable is not one of them. If Corvain believes him dead, that is precisely the advantage Alaric would want. She moved to the high table, where maps of the kingdom lay spread beneath the weight of stone paperweights. Her fingers traced the road from Thornridge to Ravencrest, then south to the capital. How long until Corvain reaches the king? 4 days, Thorn said. 5 if the weather turns worse. And how long before his men come to claim these lands? A week, perhaps less if he sends ravens ahead. Elowen nodded slowly. 7 days. 7 days to prepare for war or ruin. 7 days to be right about her husband, or to be made a fool by grief and wishful thinking. She looked up at the assembled soldiers, at the servants clustered near the walls, at the ancient stones of Ravencrest Keep that had sheltered her family through centuries of conflict. This castle had never fallen. She would not be the first to let it. Commander Thorn, Captain Aldrich, she said formally, I thank you for your service and your honesty. You and your men are welcome to rest here tonight. In the morning, those who wish to return to the capital may do so with my blessing and sufficient supplies. Those who wish to remain will be preparing for the return of Lord Alaric Ravencrest, whether his enemies believe in it or not. And if you're wrong, Thorn asked quietly, if he truly is dead, and General Corvain arrives with the king's seal and an army, Lady Elowen's smile returned, sharper than any blade in the room. Then, Commander, we will discover whether a widow's conviction can hold a castle better than a general's treachery can take it. But I will tell you this. I have managed these lands for 10 years, while my husband fought the kingdom's wars. I have negotiated with merchant princes and mountain clans, rationed food through winters that would have starved lesser holds, and kept the peace when border lords came raiding. I have been preparing for this moment since the day I learned what it meant to be a soldier's wife. She gestured to the windows, where the mist pressed against the glass like a living thing. This is the North. We do not break easily, and we do not abandon our own, especially when our own might yet be coming home. Thunder rolled across the mountains, distant but growing closer. In the courtyard, horses whinnied and stamped. A raven cawed from the battlements, its cry sharp and foreboding. Elowen walked to the eastern window, the one that looked down the mountain road, the one she had stood at every evening since Alaric left. The mist was thickening now, swallowing the valley in sheets of gray, but somewhere beyond it, past the treacherous passes and hostile lands, past whatever trap had been laid, somewhere, she believed, her husband was fighting his way home, and when he arrived, there would be a reckoning for those who had tried to bury him. 300 miles south, in a fortress of black stone that the locals called the Hollow, Lord Alaric Ravencrest woke to the sound of dripping water and distant screaming. He had lost track of the days. 4, 5. The cell had no windows, only a narrow slot high on the wall that let in thin fingers of gray light when the sun bothered to pierce the perpetual clouds. The screaming came at irregular intervals, sometimes a man's voice, sometimes a woman's, sometimes just sobbing that went on until it dissolved into silence more terrible than any cry. Alaric did not scream. He had learned long ago that fear was a luxury soldiers could not afford. He sat with his back against the wet stone wall, his hands chained above his head by iron manacles that had rubbed his wrists raw. His armor was gone, stripped from him when he'd woken here after the ambush at Thornridge. They'd left him in torn trousers and a blood-stained shirt, barefoot on stone so cold it burned. His right shoulder throbbed where a sword had caught him, and his ribs ached from kicks delivered by men who had made certain he understood his situation before locking him away. He was 35 years old, commander of the North's finest cavalry, veteran of 20 campaigns, holder of lands that stretched from the Stormbreak Mountains to the Wandering River. And now he was a ghost, presumed dead, unmourned except by the one person whose mourning actually mattered. Elowen would not believe it. Of that he was certain. He closed his eyes, picturing her face, those sharp green eyes that missed nothing, the way her mouth quirked when she was amused by something she wouldn't admit was funny, the steel beneath her silk that had attracted him more than any conventional beauty ever could. She was brilliant and ruthless and loyal in ways that terrified lesser men. When his father had arranged their marriage, Alaric had expected political convenience. What he'd found was partnership, a meeting of minds that had grown into something deeper than either of them had anticipated. She would hold Ravencrest. She would see through Corvain's lies. She would wait, and Alaric would survive long enough to get back to her. The cell door scraped open. Torchlight flooded in, making him squint. 2 guards entered first, sword-wielding brutes in chainmail that marked them as professional soldiers. Behind them came a figure in rich burgundy robes trimmed with ermine, General Edmund Corvain, 50 years old and soft in the way men got when they commanded from the rear rather than the front lines. "Ah, Lord Ravencrest." Corvain's voice was oil over velvet, smooth and slippery. "Still breathing, I see. How resilient. I admire that about you truly. It's why I needed you removed rather than simply managed." Alaric said nothing. He had learned that silence frustrated Corvain more than any insult. The general circled, hands clasped behind his back, examining the prisoner like a merchant appraising questionable livestock. "Let me explain your situation, since you may be harboring unwise hopes. Your army believes you dead. Your king will soon receive word of your heroic sacrifice. Your wife, lovely Elowen, such a waste she chose you over me, will be grieving. In 7 days I will arrive at Ravencrest Keep with royal writ granting me governorship of the Northern Territories. Your lands will pass to the crown, and by crown I mean to me, of course. Your legacy will be a eulogy and a monument." He leaned close enough that Alaric could smell wine on his breath. "And you will remain here in this cell until I decide whether it's more convenient for you to die quietly, or whether I can extract enough information about your holdings, your alliances, your secrets, to make keeping you alive worthwhile. Either way, Lord Ravencrest, you have ceased to matter." Alaric let the silence stretch. Then slowly he smiled, a faint, bloody smile that made Corvain's face tighten. "You made 3 mistakes," Alaric said, his voice hoarse from disuse but steady. "First, you assumed I'm alone. I'm not. Every man who rode with me has family, friends, brothers in arms who will ask questions when the story doesn't add up. Soldiers gossip worse than market women. By now, doubt is spreading through the ranks like disease." Corvain's jaw clenched, but he didn't interrupt. "Second, you underestimated my wife. Elowen has governed the North for a decade while I fought in the South. She knows every lord, every bannerman, every secret passage in that castle better than I do. She's smarter than both of us, more ruthless when necessary, and completely unwilling to surrender what's hers. You think 7 days is enough to break her? You couldn't break her in 7 years. And third?" Corvain's voice was tight now, anger bleeding through the smooth facade. "Third," Alaric said softly, "you assume the king is as stupid as you are. King Hadrian is old, but he's not senile. He's watched you maneuver for power since you were a captain in his father's guard. He knows what you want. And when my absence starts causing problems in the North, rebellions, raids, Noble disputes. He'll wonder why his most effective commander died so conveniently. Doubt will find him too. And when it does, when he sends someone to investigate, Alaric's smile widened. You'll have to explain why you've been keeping me in your dungeon instead of giving me a soldier's burial. For a long moment, Corvain stared at him. Then he laughed. A short, bitter bark. You always were too clever. That's why you're dangerous. But you're forgetting something, Ravencrest. I don't need the king to believe me indefinitely. I just need him to believe me long enough. Once I control your lands, once I have my own army drawn from your bannermen, once I've consolidated power in the north, what the king suspects won't matter. I'll be too strong to remove. Then you've already lost, Alaric said quietly. Because you're planning a coup and the king has spies everywhere, including, I suspect, in this very fortress. How else do you think I knew you'd try something like this? Corvain's face went white. His hand shot out, grabbing Alaric's throat, squeezing. Who? Who have you bribed? Which of my men betrayed me? Alaric couldn't answer even if he wanted to. The grip was too tight, cutting off air. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision. But he kept his eyes locked on Corvain's, refusing to give the man the satisfaction of seeing fear. Finally, Corvain released him, stepping back as Alaric coughed and gasped. It doesn't matter, the general said, his voice cold now, all pretense gone. By the time anyone investigates, you'll be dead and I'll have what I want. Your wife can keep the castle if she behaves. I might even let her keep her title as a courtesy. But make no mistake, Ravencrest, you're already a ghost. The only question is whether you'll haunt this cell or a grave. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, I did admire you. You were the kingdom's finest soldier. Under different circumstances, we might have been allies. He gestured to the guards. No food today. Let him think about cooperation. The door slammed shut. Darkness returned, broken only by that thin line of gray light from above. Alaric leaned his head back against the stone, ignoring the pain in his shoulder, his ribs, his wrists. Corvain was right about one thing. Time was not on his side. 7 days until the general reached Ravencrest. Maybe 3 or 4 more before Elowen would be forced to make impossible decisions about defending a castle against royal authority. But Corvain was also wrong about something crucial. Alaric had not survived 20 campaigns by being predictable. He had not built a reputation as the North's finest commander by waiting for rescue. He had allies. Not many. Not enough to storm this fortress, but enough to get word out. Before the Battle of Thornridge, he'd suspected Corvain was planning something. He'd sent 3 trusted men, riders who weren't officially part of the army roster, to shadow the general's movements and report anything suspicious. One of them had to have survived. One of them had to be spreading the truth even now. And if he was wrong, if he truly was alone, then he would escape. Somehow, because Elowen was waiting, and he'd be damned if he'd let Edmund Corvain, a coward who'd never drawn blood except from a safe distance, destroy everything they'd built together. He closed his eyes, conserving strength, and began counting stones in the darkness, mapping the cell by memory and touch. Every prison had a weakness. Every captor made mistakes. He just had to survive long enough to find them. The 5th morning after the army's return, Elowen stood on the battlements of Ravencrest Keep, watching the horizon as autumn wind whipped her hair into wild tangles. Below, the castle courtyard bustled with activity, soldiers drilling with renewed intensity, servants hauling supplies to the storerooms, blacksmiths working double shifts to sharpen weapons and reinforce armor. She had spent 4 days preparing for what most still believed was madness. Commander Thorne had stayed, bringing with him 40 loyal men who trusted his judgment more than the official narrative. Captain Aldrich had been invaluable, drilling the castle guard and village militia into something resembling a coherent fighting force. Letters had been dispatched to every bannerman in the north, carefully worded to sound like routine correspondence, but asking pointed questions about troop movements and political allegiances. 3 letters had come back. 2 expressed condolences and polite neutrality. Translation: they would wait to see who won before choosing sides. But the 3rd, from Lord Brannon of Wolfspine Hold, contained a single line that made Elowen's heart race. The mountains remember wolves better than crows remember blood. Crows were Corvain's house sigil. It was confirmation, subtle, but clear. Brannon had heard something, seen something, suspected something. He was an old man, 70 if he was a day, too old to ride to war but sharp enough to smell conspiracy. If he doubted the official story, others might too. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was a thread, and threads could be pulled. My lady. She turned to find Captain Aldrich approaching, his young face grave. He carried a sealed letter marked with the king's own wax, a crimson seal impressed with the royal eagle. This arrived by rider an hour ago, Aldrich said quietly. Fast courier. He's waiting for a response. Elowen took the letter, her hand steady despite the ice spreading through her chest. She broke the seal and read, Lady Elowen Ravencrest. It grieves us beyond measure to confirm the loss of Lord Alaric Ravencrest, commander of the Northern Reach and defender of the Stormbreak frontier. His sacrifice at Thornridge will be honored with monuments and songs. His loyalty to the crown will never be forgotten. In recognition of the North's strategic importance and the need for strong governance during this time of mourning, we hereby appoint General Edmund Corvain as Royal Steward of the Northern Territories, effective immediately. General Corvain will arrive at Ravencrest Keep within 3 days to assume administrative control. We trust you will cooperate with this transition and accept our deepest sympathies for your loss. By His Majesty's hand, King Hadrian III. The words blurred. Not from tears. Elowen was far beyond tears, but from rage so pure it made her vision swim. 3 days. Not 7. Corvain had moved faster than expected, probably sent ravens ahead to speed the king's response. She read the letter again, this time noting what it didn't say. The king expressed grief, appointed Corvain, demanded cooperation, but he hadn't ordered her to leave. He hadn't stripped her title. He hadn't claimed Ravencrest for the crown directly. The letter granted Corvain administrative control, not ownership. It was a careful choice of words from a careful king. Hadrian was giving Corvain enough rope to either secure the North or hang himself. What does it say? Aldrich asked. Elowen folded the letter slowly. It says we have 3 days instead of 7, and it says the king is more suspicious of Corvain than he's letting on. She looked at the young captain. How many men do we have now? Total? 200 if you count the village militia. Maybe 300 if the outlying farms send their sons like you requested. Against how many in Corvain's company? Reports say 800, my lady. Professional soldiers, if he brought his full force. The numbers were brutal. Even holding a castle, even with home terrain advantage, 300 poorly trained defenders against 800 veterans was suicide. But Elowen wasn't planning to defend. She was planning to expose. Send for Commander Thorne and Lord Brannon's steward, she ordered. And prepare the Great Hall. We're calling a council. A council, my lady? Of whom? Everyone who matters, Elowen said, moving toward the stairs. Every noble within 3 days' ride, every merchant guild representative, every village elder. If Corvain wants to claim these lands, he'll do it in front of witnesses who can testify to exactly how legitimate his authority really is. 2 hours later, the Great Hall filled with confused and anxious faces. Elowen stood at the high table, flanked by Thorne and Aldrich, while servants handed out cups of hot wine and platters of bread and cheese. She had learned from Alaric that you could control a meeting by controlling comfort. Warm people with full stomachs were easier to persuade than cold, hungry ones. When everyone had settled, she spoke. Her voice carried to every corner of the hall, clear and commanding. Thank you for coming on such short notice. I know many of you traveled hard to be here, and I will not waste your time. You've all heard that Lord Alaric is dead. You've heard that General Corvain is coming to govern in his place. I tell you now, both statements are lies built on half-truths. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Elowen raised a hand for silence. Lord Alaric is not dead. He is missing. There is no body, no confirmation beyond a blood-stained banner that proves nothing except that he fought hard. General Corvain claims my husband fell heroically. But Corvain is the same man who countermanded Alaric's battle plan and forced an engagement on ground favorable to the enemy. The same man who has coveted these lands for 12 years. The same man who now arrives with royal authority to claim what he could never win fairly. But the king's letter, began Lord Merrick of Thornvale, an older man with lands bordering Corvain's southern territories. The king's letter grants administrative control. Elowen interrupted. Not ownership, not permanent governorship. King Hadrian is careful with words. He suspects something is wrong, but he cannot act without proof. So I will provide it. She gestured to a servant, who brought forward a small chest. Elowen opened it, revealing 3 items. A personal letter in Alaric's handwriting, dated 2 weeks before Thornridge, a map of the battlefield with Alaric's original strategy marked in red ink, and a sealed testimony from a soldier who had witnessed Corvain's orders. "My husband planned to hold at Greystone Pass," Elowen said, spreading the map across the table. "Defensible position, narrow approach, perfect for our cavalry. Instead, Corvain ordered an immediate advance to Thornridge, open ground where we had no advantage. Lord Alaric protested. He was overruled. And then, conveniently, he died in a battle that went exactly as wrong as he predicted it would." She held up the soldier's testimony. "This is from a sergeant who heard Corvain discussing the northern problem with his captains the night before the battle. He spoke of removing obstacles, consolidating power, taking what weaker men would not dare claim. The sergeant thought it was just bravado. Now he's not sure, and neither should you be." The hall erupted in argument. Some voices supported her, bannermen loyal to House Ravencrest, merchants who had prospered under Alaric's fair governance. Others shouted about treason and defying royal authority. Lord Merrick stood, his face troubled. "Lady Alowen, even if you're right, and I pray to God you are, what can we do? The king has spoken. Corvain arrives in 3 days with an army. We cannot defy the crown without proof, and we cannot get proof if Alaric is dead or imprisoned somewhere we can't reach. Then we buy time," Elowen said firmly. "We make Corvain's takeover as public and witnessed as possible. We force him to answer questions, to justify his actions, to explain inconsistencies. We make the process so visible that any misstep, any revealed lie, reaches the king's ears before Corvain can consolidate enough power to become untouchable." "And if that's not enough?" asked Lady Helena of Blackwood, a sharp-eyed widow who controlled the river trade. "If Corvain has already won, and we're just delaying the inevitable?" Elowen met her gaze squarely. "Then at least history will record that House Ravencrest went down fighting for truth rather than surrendering to lies. I would rather lose everything standing for my husband than keep my lands by betraying his memory." Silence fell. Then Commander Thorne stepped forward, his scarred face set. "I rode with Lord Alaric for 20 years, he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience and pain. "I've seen him fight through impossible odds. I've watched him pull victory from certain defeat. I've also watched General Corvain take credit for battles he observed from a safe distance. Lady Elowen's right. The story doesn't add up. If there's even a chance Alaric lives, I'll stand with her." "As will I," Captain Aldrich added. One by one others stood. Not everyone. Some remained seated, faces troubled but unwilling to commit. But enough. Enough to make Corvain's arrival a challenge rather than a coronation. Lord Brannon's steward, a gray-haired man named Kelvin, approached the high table. "My lord sends word," he said quietly. "He has friends in the capital, old men who remember things. He believes there may be a way to reach the king's ear, if you can give us proof worth sharing." "Then tell your lord to prepare his friends," Elowen said. "Because in 3 days, when General Corvain rides through those gates expecting a widow's surrender, he's going to get something very different." That night, alone in the chambers she had shared with Alaric, Elowen sat by the fire and allowed herself one moment of doubt. What if she was wrong? What if grief had blinded her to reality? What if Alaric was truly dead, and she was about to drag loyal people into a doomed rebellion against royal authority? She looked at the bed they had shared, at the books Alaric loved, at the small wooden wolf he had carved for her on their first anniversary. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of partnership, of shared decisions and divided labor, of learning each other's minds so thoroughly that words often became unnecessary. He wasn't dead. She would know. She would feel it. And even if she was wrong, even if the worst had happened, she would not let Edmund Corvain rewrite her husband's legacy. She would not let a coward and a schemer profit from murder. Thunder rolled across the mountains, closer now. The storm was coming, and so was the reckoning. The third day dawned cold and gray, with fog so thick the sentries could barely see the valley road. Elowen had been awake since before sunrise, dressed in formal black trimmed with silver, mourning colors deliberately chosen. Let Corvain think her compliant. Let him enter confident and careless. The castle was ready. Witnesses packed the great hall. Nobles, merchants, soldiers, even common folk from the village who had been invited to observe this historic transition of power. It was unprecedented, almost scandalous, to make a political ceremony so public. That was precisely why Elowen had done it. At noon, The gates opened. General Corvain rode in at the head of a column of 800 soldiers, their armor gleaming despite the mist, their banners snapping in the wind, black crows on blood-red fields. Corvain himself wore ceremonial plate polished to a mirror shine, with the king's seal prominently displayed on his breastplate. He dismounted in the courtyard, expecting Elowen to meet him there, to submit before his army and her people. Instead, Commander Thorne stepped forward, his expression neutral. "General Corvain," Thorne said formally, "Lady Ravencrest awaits you in the Great Hall, where she has assembled the lords and witnesses required to formally transfer governance. If you'll follow me." Corvain's eyes narrowed, sensing a trap but unable to identify it. He could hardly refuse without looking suspicious. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Let's proceed." He entered with 20 of his personal guard, leaving the rest of his army in the courtyard where Captain Aldrich and 300 armed men watched them carefully. The numbers were still lopsided, but close enough that violence would be costly. The great hall fell silent as Corvain entered. Every eye turned to watch him walk toward the high table where Elowen stood, surrounded by witnesses. She did not bow. She simply regarded him with cool, appraising eyes. "General Corvain," she said, her voice carrying perfectly. "Welcome to Ravencrest Keep. I understand you bring royal authority to assume governance of these lands. Before we proceed, however, custom requires that certain formalities be observed. These witnesses are here to ensure everything is done properly and legally." Corvain's smile was thin. "Of course, Lady Elowen. I appreciate your cooperation. This is difficult for you, I know, but the kingdom's needs must come first." "Indeed they must," Elowen agreed. "Which is why I must ask you several questions, General, so that all present understand the exact circumstances of my husband's death and your appointment. You don't object to transparency, do you?" A muscle twitched in Corvain's jaw. "Ask what you will." "Excellent." Elowen gestured to the map of Thornridge spread across the table. "This was my husband's battle plan, to hold at Greystone Pass. You countermanded it and ordered an advance to Thornridge. Why?" "The king demanded immediate action. Thornridge offered strategic opportunities." "What opportunities?" "The terrain heavily favored the enemy." "Lady Elowen, I'm not here to justify military decisions to a widow who—" "You're not here to justify them to me," Elowen interrupted coldly. "You're here to justify them to witnesses who will report this conversation to every corner of the kingdom. Please answer the question." Silence stretched. Finally, Corvain said, "The decision was made based on intelligence suggesting enemy weakness at Thornridge. The intelligence proved incorrect. Who provided this intelligence?" "That's classified military." "Who provided the intelligence?" Corvain's face darkened. "I did, based on scout reports." "Show me the reports." "I don't carry field documents to political ceremonies." "How convenient." Elowen picked up a piece of paper. "This is testimony from 3 scouts who were assigned to Thornridge reconnaissance. All 3 reported the terrain was unsuitable for cavalry engagement. All 3 recommended holding at Greystone. Their reports were filed 2 days before the battle. Are these scouts lying, General? Or did you ignore intelligence that contradicted your predetermined plan?" The crowd murmured. Corvain's guards shifted uneasily. This was going very differently than expected. "Lord Alaric died bravely," Corvain said, changing tactics. "His sacrifice saved thousands. Why dishonor his memory with conspiracy theories?" "Because there's no body," Elowen said flatly. "Because soldiers reported hearing coordinated orders after the retreat. Not battle cries, but instructions for capture. Because you arrive remarkably quickly to claim lands you've coveted for years, backed by royal authority obtained within days of my husband's convenient death. These aren't conspiracy theories, General. They're questions that deserve answers. I've answered them. Your husband fell in battle. I witnessed it myself." "Then describe his wounds." Corvain blinked. "What?" "Describe the wounds that killed him. Where was he struck? How many times? What weapon? You were there. You witnessed it. Surely you remember details about the death of the kingdom's finest commander." For the first time, genuine fear flickered across Corvain's face. It was chaos. There was blood, fighting everywhere. Was he run through? Beheaded, shot with arrows? Surely someone who witnessed it can provide some detail. Corvain's mouth opened and closed. Around him, his guards were looking at him now, doubt creeping into their expressions. In the crowd, whispers spread like wildfire. And then, from the back of the hall, a voice like thunder. Perhaps I can clarify. Every head turned. The crowd parted. And through the doors, dripping with rain, limping but alive, walked Lord Alaric Ravencrest. He looked like death barely warmed over, face bruised and cut, right arm in a rough sling, clothes torn and blood-stained, but his eyes burned with fierce intelligence, and when he smiled, it was the smile of a man who had just won a war. "Apologies for my tardiness," Alaric said, his voice hoarse but steady. "Escaping from the Hollow took longer than expected. Turns out General Corvain's prisons are better guarded than his tactical sense." Corvain went white as parchment. His hand flew to his sword. "This is impossible. You were in your dungeon," Alaric finished. "Yes. Thank you for the hospitality. The accommodations were terrible, but the conversation was enlightening. I learned all sorts of fascinating things about your plans for the North, your ambitions for the throne, your arrangements with certain disloyal elements in the capital." He limped forward, and the crowd pressed back, giving him space. Elowen remained at the high table, but her eyes shone with something beyond relief. Pure, vindicated triumph. "You tried to have me killed," Alaric continued, his voice growing stronger. "When that failed at Thornridge, you had your men capture me instead. You spread word of my death, manipulated the king, and came to steal my lands and my legacy. But you made one critical mistake, Edmund." He was close now, close enough that Corvain could see the cold fury in his eyes. "You assumed my wife would break. You assumed grief would make her weak. Instead, she held this castle, gathered witnesses, and kept you talking just long enough for me to escape and ride home. You orchestrated this entire conspiracy, and she beat you with patience in a room full of witnesses." Corvain's sword came out. "I'll kill you right here. My men will die if they try," Commander Thorne said, stepping forward with 40 soldiers, weapons drawn. "I'm loyal to House Ravencrest, not murdering schemers." All around the hall, Corvain's own guards were backing away, hands raised, unwilling to die for a commander whose treason was now undeniable. Outside, the sounds of fighting erupted briefly, then stopped, Captain Aldrich's forces overwhelming Corvain's army before they could organize resistance. Corvain stood alone, sword trembling in his hand. Then, with a roar of rage and desperation, he lunged at Alaric. Alaric sidestepped despite his injuries, letting momentum carry Corvain past him. The general stumbled, caught himself, spun back, and found himself facing not Alaric but Elowen, who had vaulted over the high table and now stood between them, a dagger gleaming in her hand. "You should have stayed in the south," she said quietly. "You should have been content with what you had. Instead, you tried to destroy the man I love, the life we built, the people we protect. For greed, for ambition, for nothing that mattered." Corvain lunged at her instead. The dagger flashed. When Thorne and Aldrich pulled them apart, Corvain was on the ground, clutching a bleeding arm, while Elowen stood over him, breathing hard, but unhurt. "Disarm him," Alaric ordered, "and send fast riders to the capital. The king will want to hear about his loyal general's attempted coup, with witnesses." 3 weeks later, Ravencrest Keep stood bright under autumn sun. The mist finally burned away. In the great hall, Alaric sat with his arm properly splinted and his wounds bandaged, reviewing reports while Elowen handled correspondence with their usual efficient division of labor. King Hadrian had arrived personally to hear the full story. Corvain was imprisoned awaiting trial. Investigations were underway into his network of conspirators, and the North remained safely under Ravencrest control, stronger now for having survived the test. Alaric set down a report and looked at his wife. "You know, when I was chained in that cell, I kept thinking about how you'd react to news of my death. I pictured you grieving, maybe collapsing. I underestimated you." Elowen didn't look up from her letter. "You've been underestimating me for 10 years. I've made peace with it. I smiled when they told me you smiled at the news. I knew then. You'd figured it out. You believed in me when an entire army didn't." Now she did look up, her green eyes soft. "Of course I believed in you. You're a stubborn bastard who refuses to die conveniently. Besides," she smiled, "I knew if you were truly gone, I'd have felt it here." She touched her heart, mirroring his gesture from weeks ago. He reached across the table, catching her hand. "I'm sorry you had to face him alone." "I wasn't alone." She squeezed his fingers. "I had 300 loyal fools, a castle full of witnesses, and the absolute certainty that you'd come home. That was enough. Next time, she interrupted, "you'll take me with you. No more solo ventures into enemy territory. We're stronger together, Alaric, this proved it. You survive the battles, I win the wars. Together we're unbeatable. He laughed, then winced as his ribs protested. Agreed, though I'd prefer fewer battles and wars altogether. Then stop making enemies of ambitious generals. I'll work on that. She rose, moving around the table to kiss him gently, careful of his injuries. When she pulled back, her expression was serious. They'll try again, you know. Other Corvains, other schemes. The North is too valuable, and we're too effective. We'll always have enemies. Then we'll face them the same way we faced this one, Alaric said. Together, with you being brilliant and terrifying and me being stubbornly unkillable. It's a solid strategy. It's kept us alive this long. Outside, the autumn wind sang through the mountains carrying the scent of pine and coming winter. The castle's wolf banners snapped in the breeze, silver on crimson, marking lands that had been held, tested, and kept. In the great hall of Ravencrest Keep, a lord and lady held hands and planned for the future, bound by love that had survived war, betrayal, and death itself. Some bonds, they had learned, were stronger than any conspiracy. Some wolves could not be caged, and some women simply refused to believe lies even when the entire world insisted they were true.